Great Demon King, Chapter 50. A Harsh Reality. An ear-piercing round of screams first sounded, followed by all sorts of noises emanating from a house on the left side of the alley. Cacophony of chaos and distress filled the narrow passageway, creating an atmosphere thick with tension and fear. After a while, Beecher and the others emerged, dragging a bedraggled Claude who wasn't quite there. His body seemed disoriented, lacking the vigor he once possessed. Irene's face was etched with pure rage as she grimly lectured Claude while staring at him. Her eyes blazed with anger, and her voice was sharp and unforgiving. "Claude, you're disgusting. I never want to see you again. Katie, let's go." Her words cut through the night air, leaving Claude gasping and weak from the earlier confrontation. With the way things had developed, Han Shuo knew that his revenge had been exacted, and that there was no further need to stick around. When he saw Irene and Katie walking quickly in his direction, he hastily hid himself behind a shadowed corner and leisurely made his way back to the hotel, blending into the dimly lit surroundings with ease. Back in the hotel, Han Shuo washed up swiftly, the warm water helping to soothe the bruises and scratches he had accumulated. He then sat cross-legged on the bed, preparing to practice magic. The magical yuan slowly expanded his meridians inch by inch. Han Shuo grit his teeth against the heart-wrenching pain and continuously circulated his magical yuan according to the rigorous instructions of the open passages realm. Unbearable pain often accompanied the process of practicing magic. This caused Han Shuo's previously lackadaisical demeanor to shift into one of firm resolve. Whether it was his willpower or his ability to stoically endure pain, Han Shuo had significantly increased both. Each surge of magical energy through his body fortified his determination, hardening his character and sharpening his focus. Han Shuo's entire personality and character had unknowingly been continuously changing with the advent of practicing magic. As his strength slowly increased, the previously timid and cowering Han Shuo had already experienced great transformations. The way he viewed and understood the world was vastly different from the thoughts he had held prior. His mind had become more strategic, his actions more calculated, and his resolve unbreakable. A solid, dull footstep suddenly echoed in Han Shuo's heart. He abruptly stopped all magic practice, held his breath, and concentrated. All his bodily functions instantaneously sank into a frozen and unmoving status. His senses heightened, every sound and movement around him became crystal clear. The footsteps that had sounded until now had been from the southern intersection of the town of Droll and the dark forest. Based on the dullness and rhythm of the thumps, Han Shuo could deduce that this came from a magical creature with high speed. This creature's weight was definitely heavier than a battle steed, and their numbers consisted of more than a few. The nature of the sound suggested a coordinated group, moving swiftly and purposefully through the night. Creasing his brow, Han Shuo thought for a while before making a decisive move. He walked out of the hotel, slowly moving towards the direction of the magical creatures, his mind focused on assessing the situation. The night air was cool, the scent of damp earth and foliage filling his nostrils as he approached the outskirts of the dark forest. Just as Han Shuo had emerged from the hotel and arrived at the southern streets of Droll, two figures rushed over with looks of haste. It was an elderly, thin wizard and a female elven archer with green-tipped ears. The two displayed expressions of shock upon seeing Han Shuo, as if they hadn't thought that Han Shuo would be here. "Little fellow, what are you doing here?" The thin, small wizard gazed at Han Shuo and asked with a strained smile. His eyes reflected a mix of relief and concern, hinting at the urgency of the situation. From their cautious attitudes, Han Shuo understood that they had most likely also detected the disturbance coming from the south. Weighing things up internally, Han Shuo made a slight bow and responded, "Noble wizard, I have become separated from my companions. They said they would return here after a few days, so I've been waiting here." The wizard nodded and frowned in consideration. He said to the female elven archer next to him, "Blanche, go scout and see if it's wolf riders from the Orc Shan. They always send wolf riders every year before winter to raid and loot the villages on the outer edge of the empire. But the town of Droll is in a unique location and is filled with large quantities of adventurers and mercenaries. The orcs have never sent wolf riders to attack Droll before. Why would they act so oddly this time? Not to mention that there is still quite a bit of time before winter." "Yes, Master Felix." Upon hearing the old wizard Felix's words, the female elven archer called Blanche immediately headed south, floating in front of Han Shuo like a gust of wind. Her movements were swift and silent, her bow at the ready in case of any sudden threats. "Noble wizard, the town of Droll isn't a peaceful place. It's late at night, so you should head back early to rest. Your companions should come looking for you when they return, so there's no need to continue waiting here. Felix looked at Han Shuo with a smile as he tried to convince him, his voice carrying a note of authority, tempered with genuine concern. All right, then I'll be heading back now. Han Shuo responded calmly and started picking his way back as soon as he'd finished speaking. His footsteps were measured, each step purposeful, as he navigated the quiet streets of Droll. After Han Shuo had left, Felix mused as he stared oddly at Han Shuo's retreating figure. He finally murmured to himself after a while, I must be overthinking the situation. There's no way that this kid is more perceptive than me, a wind archmage. On his way back to his hotel, Han Shuo noticed that a few others walked out from nearby hotels with the same surprised expression, hastily making their way to the southern street. It looked like they too had detected the disturbance and had gone to the southern street to check things out. The town of Droll was teeming with activity, the bustling streets filled with the noise of revelry and the occasional outburst of chaos. Brian, I have some matters with you. Come here for a second. On the way back, Han Shuo bumped into Claude on the street outside the hotel. Claude's face was heavily overcast, and it appeared that he was in an exceedingly bad mood. His usually confident and composed demeanor had been marred by frustration and anger, his eyes dark and filled with a simmering rage. Han Shuo's heart skipped a beat, a vague premonition of unease settling in his stomach. He could strongly feel repressed rage emanating from Claude. Although Claude looked at him with a calm gaze, his teeth were gnashing slightly, still enabling Han Shuo to feel the strong ripples in his emotions. Staring at Claude dumbly, Han Shuo thought furiously. At this moment, Han Shuo understood that his actions in the hotel just now had still been too heavy-handed and impulsive. When Claude had sobered up, he would have surely detected his body's condition, and certainly deduced that it was something caused by the purple Leyland in the hotel. Claude wasn't a stupid person. Only Irene and Han Shuo had been at the table then, and Irene would never do anything like this. Connecting the dots to when the waiter suddenly tripped, Claude must have sussed out the entire situation. Okay, Han Shuo thought carefully, and knew that the situation was bad. He was prepared for a brutal beating from Claude as he followed behind the knight, walking slowly out of Droll and arriving at a secluded patch of forest to the south of Droll. The dense foliage and shadowy underbrush of the forest provided the perfect backdrop for a confrontation, the sounds of nocturnal creatures adding to the tension. Indeed, he'd only made it about 10 or so meters when Claude slightly lost control after a wave from a heavily made-up, scantily clad older woman. Han Shuo could see the desperation and hunger in her eyes, her figure swaying seductively as she attempted to disrupt Claude's composure. Claude panted heavily as he made for the alley, looking like he would resolve his biological needs at close proximity, his restraint slipping further with each passing second. Wasn't that Claude? An exclamation sounded from the adjacent street. Han Shuo swiveled his head to sudden joy, inwardly exclaiming, even the heavens are helping me. The light major teacher, Beecher, and a few light major students happened to be passing by. One of the female students with particularly sharp eyes just so happened to see Claude and the coy, revealing woman dart into the alley, and had cried out in astonishment. No way, how could Claude be that kind of person? He is a noble knight, and wouldn't demean himself in places like this. Not to mention that Claude is pursuing Irene right now, so there is no way that he'd do so. Beecher frowned and said in unconvinced confusion, his analytical mind struggling to reconcile the image of Claude with the behavior he had just witnessed. Ha ha, it really was him. I'm sure I didn't see him properly. If you don't believe me, we can go inside and check. The female student who had spoken first thought for a moment and then said decisively, her determination evident in her voice. Come, Katie, it's none of your business here. Don't go poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Beecher was silent for a moment, and then hurried the students to leave quickly, his protective instincts kicking in to prevent any potential conflicts. Katie looked angrily at the alley and stomped her foot after a moment's thought. How can this be allowed? I'm going to tell Irene. If Claude isn't in his room, then it must be him. I will absolutely not allow Claude to defraud Irene's feelings. Her voice was a mix of anger and disbelief, her loyalty to Irene overriding her skepticism. Katie left in a fast, huffy pace as soon as she'd finished talking, making a beeline for the hotel that Irina was staying at. The other light major students looked askance at each other when she left, not knowing what to do or how to handle the situation. Han Shuo almost couldn't hold his raucous laughter in it. Who would have thought that things would work out like this? Han Shuo had been planning on doing things himself, and thinking of a scheme to lure Irene here. Who knew that Claude was really so unlucky? Looks like it would be difficult for him to avoid bad luck today, even if he tried. His plans for revenge were falling perfectly into place, each move more calculated and intentional than the last. After a while, an Irene with a frigid expression and a huffy Katie walked swiftly from afar. One look at Irene's expression was enough to know that she was feeling incredibly wrathful. Claude would find it tough to get out of this one, Han Shuo mused, watching as Irene's steps grew more determined and aggressive. Claude was indeed not in the hotel. Looks like I didn't see him correctly. That must have been him just now. Irene, I think if we should go in now, we'll be able to catch him in the act. How could he commit such despicable acts as a noble knight? Claude is too disgusting. Katie looked angrily at the alley after she'd arrived, her voice dripping with contempt and disbelief. Irene nodded with an icy face, wasting no moment more with talk, and grabbed Katie in a rush to the alley. Beecher and the others were afraid that a messy situation would develop and followed after a moment's hesitation, their concern evident on their faces. When they'd all gone in, Han Shuo unhurriedly made his way into the alleyway with a sinister face dressed in an evil smile. His heart raced with anticipation, knowing that his carefully laid plans were about to come to fruition. The alley was dimly lit, the shadows dancing ominously as Han Shuo prepared to confront Claude and Irene. The door to the luxurious hotel had been closed behind Claude and Irene, sealing them inside the dark alley. Han Shuo could hear the muffled sounds of their confrontation, their voices growing louder and more heated with each passing moment. He took a deep breath, his mind focused and his resolve unshaken. As he approached the center of the alley, the tension in the air was palpable. Claude, flushed with the effects of the aphrodisiac and Irene's relentless pursuit, struggled to maintain his composure. Irene, on the other hand, exuded an aura of unyielding authority, her eyes burning with determination. "Claude, why are you here? What are you trying to prove?" Irene demanded, her voice cold and unwavering. Claude, now visibly intoxicated by the aphrodisiac, stammered, I just wanted to spend some time with you, Irene. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand." Han Shuo stepped forward, his presence commanding and menacing. "Enough, Claude. It's time to face the consequences of your actions." His voice was smooth, yet carried an underlying threat that sent chills down Claude's spine. Irene glared at Han Shuo, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you to interfere, Brian? This doesn't concern you." Han Shuo's wicked smile widened as he pulled out a hidden dagger from his undergarment, the blade glinting ominously in the dim light. "Oh, but it does concern me. You see, Claude, your actions have not gone unnoticed, and it's time someone taught you a lesson." Irene took a step back, her bow at the ready, her expression a mix of fear and defiance. Claude backed away, his earlier bravado fading as he realized the gravity of the situation. Claude muttered under his breath, trying to regain his composure. "Brian, please, let's not do this. It was just a misunderstanding." Han Shuo took a step closer, the tension in the alley escalating. "No more misunderstandings, Claude. You've crossed a line, and now you must pay the price." His eyes gleamed with a mixture of anger and satisfaction, relishing the moment of confrontation. Before Claude could respond, Han Shuo lunged forward, his dagger aimed directly at Claude's heart. The swift motion left Claude no time to react, and the blade found its mark, piercing through his chest with deadly precision. Claude collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Irene watched in horror as her beloved Claude fell lifelessly to the ground. "Brian, what have you done?" she cried out, her voice breaking with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Han Shuo stood over Claude's body, his expression cold and unforgiving. "Consider this a belated revenge, Irene. Your Claude should have known better than to disrespect someone like me." His words were sharp, each syllable laced with malice. Irene, trembling with rage and grief, stepped back, her eyes blazing with fury. "You think killing him will solve anything? You've lost all sense of honor and decency." Her voice echoed through the alley, filled with a venomous disdain for Han Shuo. Han Shuo shrugged nonchalantly, his gaze unwavering. "Perhaps, but sometimes, sacrifices must be made to achieve one's goals." His voice was devoid of remorse, the darkness within him fully unleashed. As Irene turned away, tears streaming down her face, Han Shuo felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. His revenge had been swift and decisive, leaving no room for doubt about his capabilities. He took a moment to survey the alley, the lifeless body of Claude lying before him, a testament to his growing power and unrelenting pursuit of his goals. With a final glance, Han Shuo turned and walked out of the alley, his mind already plotting the next steps in his intricate game of power and vengeance. The allure of gold coins and the promise of greater strength fueled his ambition, driving him forward into the darkened streets of Droll, where new challenges awaited. As he walked away, Han Shuo couldn't help but reflect on the events that had just transpired. The transformation he had undergone over the past month had not only strengthened his magical abilities but had also hardened his heart. The once timid and uncertain young man had evolved into a formidable force, his resolve unbreakable, and his thirst for power insatiable. The harsh reality of the world he now inhabited was something Han Shuo had come to understand all too well. Status and position were foundational, integral aspects of survival and success. A yawning difference in status existed between the noble knight Claude and himself, allowing Claude to kill him without reservations and without a need to bear any particular responsibility. Claude had called him to this deserted forest because he didn't want to ruin his noble status and self. Even if he'd killed Han Shuo in Droll, it would have been quite a matter of fact with no one thinking about it twice. Growth always came at a cost. Han Shuo curled up on the ground, still emitting loud wails and pleas for mercy. A heart that only held vague thoughts of evil slowly hardened with cold. I will dice you into several pieces, letting you wail as you bleed. You will slowly, fully experience pain before dying. Remember your status in your next life. You're a mere errand slave, a pig. Never attempt to challenge the temper of your superiors. Claude snickered sinisterly as the long sword in his hand pierced towards the chest of a Han Shuo, who had seemed too long since losing the ability to defend himself. At this moment, the continuous howls suddenly disappeared as Han Shuo's curled figure abruptly moved, rolling towards Claude's feet. His speed was such that it caught Claude off guard. When Claude was about to dodge, he suddenly emitted a ghastly wail. A few iron needles stuck out from the tops of his feet, firmly nailing his feet to the ground. A wave of bone-cutting pain emanated from his lower abdomen. Claude lowered his head to find a dagger sticking out of his stomach. Han Shuo looked at him with a cold and distant gaze, the look in his eyes giving Claude a very foreign feeling. I am the son of the commander of the Griffin League. You damned errand slave, how dare you harm me? Claude's body was racked with pain as he yelled furiously with a weak voice. Thank you for letting me know the harsh truth of reality. It's because of your vaunted status that not only will I harm you, I'm going to kill you. After saying these words in a remote tone, another iron needle appeared in Han Shuo's right hand and directly pierced through Claude's throat, amidst Claude's terror-filled screams. The gruesome sight was a stark reminder of the ruthless world Han Shuo had stepped into, where power and status dictated the rules of engagement, and mercy was a luxury few could afford. As Claude's lifeless body slumped to the ground, Han Shuo stood tall, his breathing steady and his expression devoid of any remorse. The alley was silent once more, the only sounds being the distant echoes of the town's festivities and the soft rustling of leaves in the night breeze. Han Shuo had tasted the sweet satisfaction of revenge, a bitter victory that only served to further fuel his descent into darkness. With one final glance at the fallen knight, Han Shuo turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a scene of violence and the harsh reality that now firmly anchored him in his quest for power and retribution.